In my last video, I invited some friends to discuss whether the Clone Wars TV show counted as a kids' show. Yet exploring this topic inevitably leads to another question. Is the Clone Wars TV show appropriate for children? So I've brought my friends back to discuss this new angle of the Clone Wars TV show. Though I consider it a kids' show, I also admitted that it introduces mature topics, even if they're not addressed. We have, therefore, the age-old question of whether or not kids can be shown mature themes such as death, brutality, torture, and loss. I find that children are remarkably better at understanding complex and mature matters than most adults give them credit for. They also have a remarkable ability to gloss over or block out matters they don't understand. Speaking from personal experience, I was raised watching very mature shows for kids such as Batman the Animated Series, and plenty of shows intended for adults, such as Star Trek The Next Generation. To be sure, when I watched the movies Independence Day and Clue, I was terribly frightened by the more gruesome deaths I saw and had nightmares. Even so, it wasn't the themes which bothered me, but that deaths happened so quickly and unexpectedly. I'd seen more brutal deaths in The Lord of the Rings, Gladiator, and Braveheart, and not been traumatized. And even with Independence Day and Clue, I still understood the narrative structure of it, whereas the adult humor flew over my head. Not that these are especially deep movies, to the contrary, but they make references to mature topics. As for Lord of the Rings, Gladiator, and Braveheart, they deal more blatantly with mature topics of slavery, affairs, abuse of power, torture, and the like. There are certainly far darker films than these, but nothing in the Clone Wars is darker or more complex than what's found in these movies. Obviously, everyone is different, so some children may handle these themes in a better or worse way, but I don't believe there's anything inherently too mature for a child to handle in the Clone Wars.
In our opinion, the question of is it appropriate goes deeper than can they handle the scary stuff. We're more interested in what are they learning. To that end, we absolutely agree that kids can be exposed to mature topics. I believe we've brought up Zootopia, which deals with racial prejudice, in our reaction series, but I'd also point to Tangled and It series, which deal with psychological abuse and trauma, Balto, which deals with discrimination and death, Prince of Egypt, which deals with slavery and murder, Coco and Encanto, which both deal with generational trauma, Avatar: The Last Airbender, which got a Peabody Award for its presentation of war, etc. All these are movies/series that we consider appropriate for children that deal with mature topics or themes. The key for us is how the topics are presented and dealt with.
Very true. As I mentioned before, the Clone Wars doesn't actually address these mature themes. It just features them. Thus, someone will commit suicide rather than be enslaved, but the full reality of what happened isn't addressed. The horrors of war are glossed over or undermined by humor. Is this problematic for a child? Will a child view these severe matters too lightly? Will a child emulate Ahsoka and make jokes about slavery to a former slave? Basically, what is the Clone Wars teaching children? I said in my video about Ahsoka that I don't think anyone growing up with the Clone Wars will join the military just because they saw children commanders win battle after battle. I think children can recognize the medium even at an early age. I do believe that we are very impressionable and absorb a great deal from all we observe, but that we're also more resilient than to be swayed by a TV show. I can't prove it, but I don't in any way believe watching The Three Stooges made me more likely to hit my siblings. There's no proven connection between violent TV shows and violent children, and I don't believe there is one.
But how many children, after watching Superman, have donned a cape and leapt from atop the couch or their bed pretending to fly? Or told their parent that when they grow up, they want to be a fireman because they love watching Fireman Sam? I think emulation often comes down to the individual kid and how much the content resonated with them. And of course, as most children grow, long before they can actually pursue a career inspired by their favorite content, they will come to realize that there's much more to it than they thought. So yeah, an adult won't enlist in the military just because Ahsoka looks cool on the battlefield, but that doesn't mean she didn't impact their mentality of child soldiers when they were a kid. And while we agree that children are remarkably more intelligent than many give them credit for, the media that children consume is well accepted to be hugely influential on their emotional/psychological development. Yes, nothing conclusive has been found connecting violent media to violent behavior, but nothing conclusive has been found to disconnect those things. It's still an ongoing investigation in child health circles. And exposure to sexual content is another topic of discussion in regards to the impact it has on a child's healthy development. And TCW has its fair share of implicit and explicit sexual content. The depiction of suicide is also debated on how it can affect viewers. And TCW not only blatantly depicts suicide, but even has a character joking about someone committing suicide.
Maybe he is going to jump and put himself out of his misery.
For us, the presence of these aspects without the narrative addressing them in any meaningful way is a major consideration for whether the content is appropriate for young children or not.
I find myself conflicted in what to say on this topic in some regards because, whether research backs it or not, I know for a fact that what we consume influences us. Yet, at the same time, I also believe we are stronger than to be swayed by a TV show. It's an age-old and ongoing debate. Did Tom and Jerry inspire violence? Did Popeye promote smoking? I know I'm just a single source, but I quite enjoyed Popeye as a child. I even fashioned a toy pipe for myself, yet I never considered smoking. Just like I fashioned a red cape around my shoulders, but never considered I could fly. But like I said, I'm just one example. Maybe there are many more examples with the opposite outcome. Perhaps I never wanted to smoke because a childhood friend's father smoked and I couldn't stand the smell. But that's part of my point. We are fed by so many sources in society. Parents, friends, school, so on, and TV shows are only one source. And Popeye was just a single TV show, while my friend's father was another much more real source. Now, let's get specific. There's certainly bad elements of the Clone Wars. We've brought up the attitude towards suicide multiple times, and you've just quite appropriately brought up sexual themes. These are harmful attitudes. Yet they also fly over people's heads. I say this from experience. Perhaps I was so disinterested when watching, but I didn't even recall Bo-Katan slapping Ahsoka's butt until you pointed it out in your video. If I, as an adult who better understands the problematic themes being presented, can block it from my mind, I think it's reasonable for a child to do the same. And, of course, if a child learns bad behavior from this or any other show, it creates a teaching moment rather than a morally corrupt lesson. To be clear, I'm not saying a cavalier attitude towards suicide or the sexualization of a minor are okay things. I don't think anyone watching this show will automatically think it's okay either. Just like I don't think anyone watching Pepe Le Pew threatening suicide to win a girl's affection will think emotional manipulation is fun. I would never recommend this show, and I believe people such as Alibi and Emmy should point out these clearly morally objectionable things. I just don't find the show harmful, just like I don't find Pepe Le Pew or Popeye harmful. I'd say the latter two are much better written and much more worth your time, but I don't think you need to shield your child from any of them. That, of course, is just my personal opinion.
You're absolutely right that TV is just one source of influence. Popeye was popular in the 1930s, when smoking was also popular. So I think it's fair to say a kid growing up back then would be much more likely to be influenced by Popeye's smoking than a kid in today's society. Likewise, society has become aware of the damage that comes from treating emotional manipulation as humorous, and so there's more messages combating that now than would be present when Pepe Le Pew was in his prime. So, in a discussion of whether TCW is appropriate for kids, part of that should be looking at society today in order to consider how it will influence a modern young audience. Having said that, when I think about the question, what is TCW teaching children? I also think back on my own life and what I learned from what I watched as a kid. Rarely did I emulate a character's exact behavior, because I almost never found myself in the same situation as them. So yeah, I highly doubt that a kid, due to watching TCW, will act insensitively to someone who was a slave or a child soldier, because they likely won't be conversing with such people. Not to mention, repetition is a big factor when it comes to what sticks with people. One off comment or gesture in a single episode, like Catan's butt smack, is not likely to be retained and emulated by a kid. I believe the more realistic manifestation of what kids will learn will be found in the broader strokes of TCW's messages, the more subconscious influences that are repeated across the series. So we need to look at aspects like what TCW is promoting in terms of ethics, relationships, and problem solving. And just off the top of my head, TCW encourages an us good, them bad view of politics and war, wherein it often leans into the idea that the end justifies the means. And even a passing awareness of modern politics should see how this partisan view could be reinforced by external influences. Related to this, TCW characters solve most issues through deception and/or aggression, with the narrative framing these approaches as good decisions, and on the other hand, strawmanning pacifism and painting it as foolish and ineffective. TCW also includes some strange ideas about what healthy relationships look like, often framing concern for someone's well-being as distrust, and mainly using insulting banter as an indicator of friendship. Another problematic message is how Ahsoka's entitled, disrespectful, I know better than you attitude toward most everyone she interacts with is consistently supported by the narrative, rewarding her poor behavior with success after success and upholding her as a role model for the target audience. And since kids thinking that they know more than they do is just a natural phase of life, it doesn't take much influence to encourage them to emulate such behavior. Looking back on my own life, I can see how media that I'm sure many would consider harmless children's content greatly impacted my psychology for the worse. I kid you not, with influences including The Little Mermaid and the 1986 My Little Pony movie, which were favorites of mine as a little girl, I thought all my family problems could be solved if I ran away from home. And I tried. I didn't realize those movies had imparted that message, had caused me more pain, until I rewatched them as an adult just for laughs, and, well, I stopped laughing pretty quick. I don't know how old you were when you saw the films you mentioned, but many comments I've seen around the internet say they first watched TCW when they were 6, 7, 8 years old, a very impressionable age. Of course, every child is an individual, and so that factors into what and how much different media messages will affect them. But in my humble opinion, TCW, for its violent and sexual content, its mishandling of mature themes, and its many questionable messages, is not appropriate for young children. As you said, there is some worth to be had in learning from poor content, but a child needs to be old enough and a parent involved enough for any meaningful discussions to happen. And since most people view TCW either as harmless or positive, I don't think such conversations are taking place around its content.
Thanks again to Emmy and Alibi for stopping by to share their thoughts.
And yes, thank you again for having us.
It was a great discussion.
And what are your thoughts? Leave them in the comments below. But for now, that's all from me. Thanks for watching.